Millionaire ties up his own son to be eaten by wolves, but he didn't count on the dog. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It's always awesome to see how far our stories are reaching. Ethan Brooks, a 9-year-old boy with a heart full of dreams and feet bound to a wheelchair. Since he was 3, when a tragic accident changed his fate, he hasn't walked. No one speaks openly about what happened that day. Not his mother, not the doctors. All that remains is the echo of a fall and a life forever altered. Ethan is Caucasian, with ash-blonde hair that falls softly over his forehead and ice-blue eyes that look at everything with the intensity of someone who understands more than he lets on. He has a brilliant, curious mind. He's fascinated by planets, astronomy books, and theories about the multiverse. His room looks like a makeshift spaceship, with posters of nebulae and constellations plastered on the walls. But the vast universe he loves contrasts sharply with the small world his mother has built for him. Emily Brooks, his mother, also Caucasian, with a delicate face and straight brown hair always tied in a perfect bun, is a woman marked by fear. Since the accident, she has devoted her entire life to protecting Ethan. She treats him like he's made of glass, as if the slightest breeze could shatter him. Nothing happens without her oversight. Every step, every activity, every visit, every outing, everything is calculated, measured, controlled. Life doesn't always give you second chances, Ethan, she tells him constantly, her voice sweet but firm. That's why you have to be careful, and let me take care of you. But Ethan doesn't feel protected, he feels trapped. The only person who seems to understand what he truly needs is his aunt, Sarah Collins, Emily's younger sister. With porcelain skin, emerald green eyes, and a warm smile, Sarah is the only adult who doesn't look at Ethan with pity, but with admiration. She's always believed he's destined for great things. She doesn't talk to him with condescension or set unnecessary limits. She speaks to him as an equal, as if he were already a young man. And then there's Max. Max isn't just a service dog. He's Ethan's shadow, his guardian, his soulmate. A golden retriever with fur that shines like fire in the sun, Max was trained for 2 years to assist people with disabilities. But with Ethan, something unique was born. A connection so deep it goes beyond the physical. Max knows when Ethan is sad, when he's scared, when he needs silence. Sometimes he simply lies beside him, head resting on Ethan's legs, staying there without judgment or words. One afternoon, as the wind stirred the curtains at his window, Ethan watched the neighborhood kids playing with bikes, running down the street, climbing trees. He, meanwhile, remained inside, behind glass. Always behind glass. "Will we ever get to run, Max?" he asked quietly, a lump in his throat. "Will the world ever stop being afraid of me?" Max looked up and gently licked his hand. Ethan gave a faint smile, one of those sad smiles only wise children know how to give. At school, things weren't any better. Though his grades were perfect and his projects impressive, Ethan had to endure awkward stares, insensitive questions, and sometimes the disguised contempt of other students and even some teachers. His wheelchair seemed to shout his difference, and in a world that fears what's different, he learned to stay quieter than he spoke. "Why doesn't anyone ask me what I want?" he once confided to his Aunt Sarah. "Because they think they already know," she replied tenderly. "But you and I know you're not a broken child, Ethan. You're a warrior." Those words stuck in his mind like a seed, ready to sprout without him even realizing it. And so his life went on, between intergalactic dreams, medical routines, his mother's overprotection, and the silent love of his dog, until one ordinary day, without knowing it, everything changed. A seemingly innocent walk would set off a chain of events that would test every fiber of his being and reveal that even the smallest can have a brave soul. It was a Friday afternoon, one of those days when the sky seemed painted with brushes of gold and fire. Dry leaves danced to the rhythm of the wind, and the trees in the park by the Silver River swayed with a quiet calm, as if time moved slower there. Sarah Collins, Ethan's aunt, had convinced Emily to let her take the boy for a walk in the park. It wasn't easy. Emily distrusted anything that broke the strict routine she had imposed. But this time, maybe out of exhaustion, maybe because of the pleading look in Ethan's eyes, she agreed. Ethan wore a navy blue jacket, buttoned up to the collar, and a grey scarf Sarah had knitted for him last winter. His fair skin glowed under the sunset light, and his blue eyes sparkled with a mix of excitement and calm. Max, as always, stayed close by his side, harness snug, senses alert. The park by the Silver River was one of the few places where Ethan felt at peace. No city noise, no prying eyes, no constant rules chaining him down. Just trees, birds, water, and the wind. The wheelchair moved slowly along the dirt path as Sarah pushed gently, letting him enjoy the scenery. "Want to stop for a bit?" she asked, pausing near a bend where the river widened and branches hung like green curtains. Ethan nodded with a faint smile. Then, turning his head toward her with a determined look, he said, "Aunt Sarah, can I stay here alone for a while? I just want to listen to the river, think a little." Sarah hesitated for a moment. She looked around. The place was calm, and Max was there, alert, almost human in his protective expression. "Okay, but don't move from here. I'll be at that bench, all right?" she said, pointing to one a few yards away. Ethan nodded again. Sarah walked away slowly, glancing back every few seconds. She knew Ethan needed that space, though a part of her felt an undefined unease, a premonition she couldn't explain. Ethan took a deep breath. The air was cool but not freezing. Max sat beside him, ears perked, body tense. The boy closed his eyes and let himself be carried by the sounds. The murmur of the water, the crunch of leaves under distant footsteps, the whisper of branches. "Do you feel it, Max?" he murmured, without opening his eyes. "Here, I can almost imagine I'm on another planet, one where legs don't matter, and dogs are spaceship captains." Max tilted his head slightly, as if trying to understand every word. His gaze fell on the rear wheel of Ethan's chair. It was loose, without the safety lock. A simple oversight, a small mistake, and fate began to write the next scene. Ethan, lost in thought, leaned forward to touch a fallen leaf on the ground. It was just a slight movement, but enough to unbalance the chair. The path had a subtle slope toward the river, barely noticeable to those unfamiliar with it. The chair began to move, slowly, almost timidly, as if it didn't want to be noticed. Max barked softly, not fully understanding what was happening. Ethan reacted too late. He tried to brake with his hands, but the momentum had already won. "Max!" he shouted in panic as his body was pulled along with the chair, sliding downhill, straight toward the water. And then, in an eternal second, the wheelchair tipped, lost its balance, and fell. The sound of metal hitting rocks, the violent splash of cold water, and Ethan's muffled scream merged into a single moment, one that would change their lives forever. The Silver River, calm all day, seemed to awaken with a sudden roar. The water, dark and icy from recent rains, flowed with unexpected force, hiding broken branches, sharp rocks, and invisible whirlpools beneath its surface. Ethan fell into the water with his chair, as if the whole world had decided to swallow him in one breath. The impact was harsh, brutal. His small body, wrapped in the blue jacket, sank immediately as the chair's metals screeched underwater. The water engulfed him like a silent monster. His legs, immobile, didn't respond. His arms flailed desperately, trying to free himself from the safety belt that, ironically, now kept him trapped in his metal prison. He opened his mouth to scream, but only cold water rushed in. Panic overwhelmed him with devastating force. It all happened in seconds, but to him, each second felt eternal. From the shore, Sarah stood up at the sound of Max's sharp bark. "Ethan!" she screamed, but her voice no longer reached the boy. Max, seeing his little friend fall, barked furiously and ran toward the water without hesitation. He shook off his harness with a precise movement and dove headfirst into the river like a golden bolt of lightning. The impact was strong, but instinct guided him. His legs churned powerfully, cutting through the waves, fighting the current. His eyes were locked on Ethan, whose body floated halfway, trapped, struggling to breathe. Ethan felt the world fading. Everything became blurry, cold, distant. He wanted to give up. For a moment, he thought maybe it would be easier to let go, but then something brushed his cheek. A muzzle. Warm, firm, alive. "Max," he murmured, voiceless, barely a thought. The dog gently bit the collar of his jacket. He swam with strength, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. Every stroke was a battle. The water pushed, the current pulled, but he didn't let go. His hind legs churned like propellers, and his eyes shone with a determination only those who love without measure possess. Farther up on the shore, two fishermen, Jack and Tom, older men with faces weathered by sun and wind, watched the scene in horror. "My God, a kid!" shouted Jack, dropping his fishing rod. "And a dog's trying to save him," replied Tom, running through the brush, but they were far, too far. They could only watch as Max fought alone against the river's fury. Ethan felt the world start to turn again. He didn't know if it was the sound of the water, Max's warmth, or the rage of not wanting to die like this, but something inside him ignited. He managed to move an arm, weakly clinging to the dog's fur. Max, feeling him, doubled his efforts. He swam with all his soul's strength. Then a fallen branch struck the chair hard, freeing it from the muddy bottom where it had been stuck. It was the push they needed. Max seized the moment to pull with his entire body. The river still wanted to take them, but it couldn't, because when you fight for love, not even death is strong enough. The chair tilted. Ethan slipped partially out of it. Max grabbed his shirt with his teeth, keeping him afloat. Together, boy and dog, they moved downstream, dragged but together, and so, like a ray of sunlight in a storm, the race against time began. The wind blew fiercely through the trees, making branches creak as if nature itself mourned what was happening. The sun, which moments ago had bathed the park in golden hues, hid behind thick grey clouds, foreshadowing tragedy. The silver river roared, and in the midst of its uncontrollable fury, a dog swam with the desperation of a soul determined to defeat death. Max, soaked to the bone, kept his muzzle firmly clamped on Ethan's shirt. His legs moved with immense strength, though the cold began to numb his muscles. The current gave no respite, and the boy's half-conscious body floated like a feather caught in the wind. Every movement of Max was a cry to the heavens, a silent plea for help. The golden retriever's eyes, usually warm and calm, were now wide with effort and anguish. He didn't understand how they got there or what was happening. He only knew one thing: he had to save his best friend. Ethan was pale, his lips purple. Water covered his face at times, and each time he surfaced, his breaths were short, weak, almost imperceptible. A thread of consciousness kept him awake, and in that corner of clarity, he felt Max's tugs and the beating of his own heart, refusing to give up. Max swam harder, his legs striking the surface like whips, sending up splashes that marked his path. The river kept pulling them, dragging them among submerged rocks and branches. At one point, a branch grazed Max's side, leaving a deep cut. The dog whimpered but didn't let go. The taste of blood mixed with the icy water, yet his jaws never loosened. On the shore, Sarah screamed relentlessly. Her voice was lost among the trees, her eyes searching the current for a silhouette, a movement, any sign that Ethan was still alive. The fishermen, Jack and Tom, rushed downhill, tripping over roots, cursing under their breath. They carried ropes but knew they wouldn't reach them in time unless something changed soon. Max began to pant heavily. His body was starting to give out, but his heart demanded more. In his animal mind, there was no option to let go. Not while he had a breath left. Not while Ethan needed him. The current slammed them hard against a cluster of low rocks. It was a sharp blow. Ethan's body folded in on itself, nearly slipping free. Max growled with an almost human wail, and with a final effort turned his body, placing himself between the boy and the current. He pushed with his chest, his legs, his entire soul. And then, as if the river had yielded to the dog's bravery, they reached a shallower area. The water still flowed, but not with the same violence. Max, panting, dragged Ethan toward a small patch of rocks and mud. There, in that forgotten corner of the world, he managed to get his boy onto solid ground. Ethan opened his eyes for a moment. Just a second. He saw Max in front of him, bloodied, exhausted, trembling. "Max," he whispered, and then he fainted. Max collapsed beside him. But even overcome by exhaustion, he kept one paw on Ethan's chest as if saying, "He's here. I didn't let him go." Time had frozen. The river's murmur became a distant echo, as if the world held its breath, waiting for a miracle. Max, drenched, wounded, and panting with his tongue hanging out, didn't move from Ethan's side. His eyes, usually full of life, were now dimmed by exhaustion, yet he watched over his boy, like a defeated sentinel refusing to abandon his post. Ethan's body lay in the mud, cold, still, his face turned toward the grey sky. His already pale skin now looked like marble, his lips bluish. His chest rose and fell faintly, as if each breath was borrowed. Time was running out, and life was slipping away. From the hillside, Jack and Tom's hurried steps approached. Both were sturdy men, their faces weathered by years outdoors. Jack, with a grey beard and stern eyes, was the first to spot the figures by the river. "There they are, my God, they're alive," he shouted. Tom, taller with thinning blonde hair, ran downhill without thinking. His boots sank into the mud. He stumbled, fell, but got up without stopping. When they finally reached them, they saw a scene that chilled them. The unconscious boy, his clothes torn, his body wet, and the dog, with a visible cut on his side, bleeding slowly but still watching Ethan. "Stay with the kid," Jack ordered, unraveling a rope and calling for help on the radio. "I'll mark the exact location." Tom knelt beside Ethan, carefully removing the soaked scarf and checking his neck. "He's got a pulse. Weak, but he's breathing," he murmured. Then he looked at Max. "Good boy, Tom, good boy. You gave us time," he said, moved. Max barely wagged his tail. He had no strength left, but he understood. He had done his job. Higher up in the park, Sarah came down like lightning, shouting Ethan's name with a broken voice. Her face was wet with tears, her blonde hair coming loose in strands, her long coat flapping behind her like a cape. When she reached the scene, she fell to her knees beside Ethan. "Ethan! Ethan, my love, answer me," she sobbed, caressing his cheek with trembling hands. "We need to keep him warm," Tom said. "His body could go into shock." Sarah, without thinking, took off her coat and wrapped it around the boy. As she did, Max struggled to his feet, dragging himself slightly, and placed his head on Ethan's legs. It was his place. No one could take it from him. The sound of sirens approached. The ambulance, paramedics, police. Everything arrived too slowly for the moment's anguish, yet just in time to prevent the worst. One of the paramedics, David, a young man with green eyes and a determined expression, ran with a stretcher and medical gear. "Is this the kid from the report? The one who fell in the river?" he asked, checking Ethan's vital signs. "Yes, him and his dog," Sarah replied, not letting go of her nephew's hand. "His body temperature is dangerously low. We need to warm him up now." As they placed Ethan on the thermal stretcher, Max tried to follow. He stumbled. His hind legs weren't responding well. David paused when he saw him. "This dog, is he his?" "He's not just his," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "He's his life." David nodded. Carefully, he lifted Max into his arms and placed him on the same stretcher, at the boy's feet. No one dared say no. No one had the heart to separate them. The stretcher went into the ambulance. The doors closed. The siren's wail cut through the silence like a cry of hope. Sarah climbed in, her gaze fixed on Ethan, her hand on Max's wounded back. The race against time wasn't over, but love had already taken the first step to win it. The ambulance's interior became an impromptu sanctuary, where silence was as heavy as the tension filling it. Ethan lay on the stretcher, wrapped in thermal blankets, electrodes on his chest, and oxygen flowing through a small mask. His skin remained pale, his eyelids closed, his fingers cold as snow, barely moving. Beside him, curled up as if he too needed intensive care, was Max. David, the paramedic with light brown hair and sharp features, monitored every vital sign without looking away from the boy. The electrocardiogram was irregular, the pulse weak, but there was life. And as long as that existed, he wouldn't allow surrender. Sarah, seated on the small bench beside, held her nephew's hand with fierce tenderness. Her face, with delicate features and winter blue eyes, was etched with anguish, but her gaze remained steady, vigilant. Every so often she stroked Max, who, though exhausted, raised his ears slightly whenever Ethan stirred. "Hold on, my love. Just a little longer," Sarah murmured, her voice breaking, as if begging the universe to pause time. Suddenly, a faint cough came from Ethan's chest. It was weak, barely audible, but enough to make everyone in the ambulance hold their breath. Max reacted first. He raised his head and began gently licking Ethan's cheek. It wasn't just any gesture. It was deliberate, desperate, as if the dog knew the boy was caught between two worlds and his breath could bring him back. Ethan opened his eyes for a second. A fleeting moment, but full of meaning. His pupils moved slowly, disoriented, then fixed on Max. His mouth moved weak, voiceless, but everyone understood the name he tried to say, Max. Then came the unthinkable act. Something never recorded, something no training had prepared for, something born only of true love. Max stood shakily, walking clumsily across the stretcher until he was right over Ethan's chest. His body trembled. He settled as he did at home when they slept together on the couch. He placed his muzzle over the boy's heart, and there he stayed, breathing in sync, as if trying to align his life with Ethan's. David leaned forward, surprised. "What's he doing?" he asked. "He's warming him. "He's helping him live," Sarah replied, stunned. Ethan began to breathe more deeply. The sensors showed improvement. Slow, fragile, but real. Max, covering his chest, became a living shield, a furry lifeline refusing to yield to exhaustion until he was sure his boy was fully back. When they reached the hospital, a medical team was waiting. The back doors opened with a thud, and white lights flooded the scene. Doctors rushed to take the stretcher, but something stopped them. "The dog goes with him?" a nurse asked, her gaze stern. David, still shaken by what he'd seen, answered firmly, "He's not a dog. He's his medicine." Max wasn't separated. He was taken with Ethan to the intensive care unit. The doctors understood there was a bond between those two beings that defied logic, and perhaps the only thing keeping the boy alive was him. Night had fallen over the city, like a silent veil. The lights of Riverside General Hospital shone in the distance like beacons in an emotional storm. Inside the emergency room, the atmosphere was tense, filled with murmurs among doctors, the beeping of monitors, and hurried footsteps. Outside, rain began to fall softly, as if the sky at last was crying too. Ethan was rushed straight to pediatric intensive care. His body still shivered from hypothermia, his vital signs fluctuating like a candle refusing to go out. Max, still wet, wounded, and without food, was taken by Sarah's order to an adjacent room, where he was allowed to stay nearby under immediate veterinary care. "Don't separate them, please," Sarah pleaded, her voice raw, clutching a forgotten coffee cup in her hands. The doctors, seeing the woman's determined look and the way Max whimpered whenever Ethan was taken away, made an exception. On a makeshift stretcher with warm blankets and an adapted IV, the golden retriever stayed with his eyes open, alert, never stopping to watch the door where his boy had disappeared. Local news stations were already getting word of the incident. A young reporter with red hair and a rumpled suit arrived with his cameraman at the hospital entrance. The first accounts came from the fishermen, Jack and Tom, still shaken, recounting what they had witnessed in detail. "That dog, he's not normal." "No, sir," Tom said, his voice breaking. "He fought the current like he knew the boy's soul depended on him." The story spread like wildfire. "Boy in wheelchair saved from drowning by his service dog." The headline appeared on digital news, radio broadcasts, social media. But it wasn't just the news that moved people. It was the image. Ethan, wrapped in blankets, with Max curled up beside him, like a guardian angel covered in mud and scars. Inside the hospital, Sarah clung to hope like a castaway. She hadn't left the waiting room for a second. Her hair was in a messy bun, her wet coat draped over her legs, her porcelain skin marked by tears and fear. Suddenly, a familiar figure burst through the hospital doors. It was Emily Brooks, her face pale, blue eyes wide with terror, body rigid. Someone had called, maybe a nurse, maybe Sarah, and there she was in the middle of the night running for a son she had tried so hard to protect, but not enough. "Where's my son? Where's Ethan?" she shouted, breathless, reaching her sister. "He's alive." "But it was bad, Emily," Sarah said, standing, approaching slowly. "If it weren't for Max, Ethan would be gone." Emily trembled. She lowered her gaze and began to cry silently. It was the cry of a mother who finally understood that control doesn't save, but love does. Minutes later, Dr. James Wilson, with silver hair and steady hands, emerged from the emergency room. Everyone stood up at once. "Your son is out of immediate danger. We've stabilized him. The lung damage was minor and there are no signs of neurological complications. It's been a miracle." Sarah closed her eyes. Emily covered her mouth with her hands. Max, hearing the murmur of voices, whimpered softly from his stretcher. The doctor smiled. "The boy asked for his dog when he woke up." "Where's Max?" were his first words. Sarah let out a tearful laugh. "He's right here, waiting for him," she said. The doctors allowed just this once for Max to briefly enter the room. Though wounded and exhausted, he rose with difficulty and shuffled in. When he saw Ethan lying there with wires and tubes but awake, his tail wagged for the first time since the accident. He approached the bed, rested his head on the mattress, and sighed. Ethan smiled. "I promised you. We wouldn't be separated," he said, his voice weak but full of light. And so in that simple, sacred moment, the true rescue was complete. The next morning dawned with a completely clear sky, as if the universe offered a truce after the previous night's chaos. At the entrance of Riverside General Hospital, Dozens of journalists, cameras, and microphones waited anxiously. What had started as a local rumor had become a national phenomenon. Service dog saves boy in wheelchair from drowning. Social media was exploding. On Twitter, the hashtag #FireHeroMax trended worldwide. The images captured by a local news cameraman, Ethan unconscious, Max at his side, bleeding but vigilant, played on every news channel. Morning shows, news websites, celebrities, and public figures began sharing the story. But it wasn't just words, it was tears, genuine admiration. Something in this story touched a chord the world seemed to have forgotten. Pure, unconditional, brave love. Inside the hospital, Ethan, now conscious and stronger, watched a small portable TV set up by the nurses. Max slept curled up like a puppy, a white bandage on his side, his breathing calm, his expression utterly peaceful. Ethan watched the screen in awe. His face still showed traces of the trauma, but his blue eyes had a new spark. He saw his story told by others. He heard strangers say his name with respect. But what moved him most wasn't that. It was how they talked about Max. "Look, Max," he said softly, stroking his ear. "You're not just my hero anymore. Now everyone knows who you are." Across the room, Sarah sat with a cup of hot tea in her hands. Despite her exhaustion, her face radiated pride. Emily, on the other hand, stood, looking at her son as if seeing him for the first time. Not the fragile child she had overprotected, but the little warrior who had faced death and won. "I never understood how much you needed to choose for yourself," Emily whispered, barely audible. "But I swear from now on I'll learn." Ethan turned his face to her and smiled tenderly. "I have things to learn too, Mom, but Max already knows it all," he said, winking. Sarah let out a short, dry laugh filled with relief. Soon after, the hospital director, Dr. Robert Hayes, a tall, thin man with a neat beard and deep voice, entered the room with an elegant woman with her hair tied back, Laura Bennett, a representative of the National Service Animal Association. "Ethan, good morning," Hayes said with a smile. "We got a call this morning from the state governor and another from a TV producer. But before we talk about that, I'd like to introduce someone." Laura approached, knelt to Ethan's level, and extended her hand. "Mr. Brooks, it's an honor to meet you. Your story, and Max's, has touched millions of hearts. Today, on behalf of our association and thousands of people with disabilities, we want to publicly recognize Max as Hero Dog of the Year." Ethan's eyes widened, stunned. Max, as if knowing they were talking about him, lifted his head and yawned with elegance. Laura smiled and hung a small gold medal carefully around the dog's neck. "This isn't just an award," she explained. "It's a symbol of what he represents. Loyalty, intelligence, sacrifice, and love." Sarah clapped softly. Emily couldn't stop a tear from sliding down her cheek. Later that day, news channels broadcast live from outside the hospital. Laura gave statements, and a brief appearance of Ethan waving from the window with Max unleashed a wave of emotion across the country. That night, as the world kept talking about them, Ethan whispered to his best friend, "You saved my life, but more than that, Max, you taught me how to live." And Max, as if understanding every syllable, placed his paw on the boy's arm and closed his eyes. In that moment, there was no fame, no headlines, no cameras, just two souls who had defeated fate together. 3 weeks had passed since that afternoon when the river tried to take Ethan. Outside, the trees were shedding their last leaves, and a gentle winter breeze slipped through the windows of the Neuromuscular Rehabilitation Center, where he now spent his days. It was a modern building, surrounded by well-kept gardens and wide hallways, designed not just to heal the body but also the spirit. Ethan, with rosier cheeks and still bright eyes, had started a new routine. For the first time, he attended physical therapy sessions with real determination. Not because anyone forced him, not out of pressure, but from a quiet conviction that had taken root inside him. And in every session, every exercise, Max was there with an almost human patience, like an older brother who never gets distracted. The physical therapist assigned to his case was Noah Parker, a young man with light brown hair, very fair skin, and intense green eyes. He had a gentle way of speaking, but was firm with instructions. From day one, he knew Ethan wasn't just any patient. "I'm not here for pity," Ethan told him in their first session. "I'm here because I want to get better. I want to try. And if I can't, At least I'll know I didn't give up." Noah smiled without a word. In his experience, he'd met many strong patients, but none with that kind of quiet fire. Days passed with discipline, effort, and silences that said more than words. Ethan began strengthening his back muscles, arm control, and even trunk mobility. It wasn't magic. It wasn't miracles. It was work, Will, and every now and then, a pat from Max or a look that said, "Keep going, you're doing great." Outside the therapy room, Ethan started receiving letters from kids across the country. Small envelopes arrived daily, handwritten notes, drawings of him and Max, words of encouragement, love, hope. Emily, now staying near the center, cried silently reading them. Sarah helped answer each one. Max sniffed them all, as if memorizing the love in every sender. One day, Ethan was invited to speak at a conference on inclusion and accessibility at a local university auditorium. When the offer came, he hesitated. He'd never spoken in public before. But that night, as Max slept on a blanket in his room, he looked at him and whispered, "What if other people need to hear what I learned, Max? Maybe it's time." He accepted. When he took the stage, the auditorium was full. Professors, students, activists, families, all silent. Ethan wore a white shirt and a dark blue wool jacket. Max, with a clean harness and his medal around his neck, walked beside him. "Good afternoon," he said clearly. "My name is Ethan Brooks, and a few weeks ago, I almost died. But thanks to Max, my service dog, I'm here. And today, I'm not just here to tell you how he saved me, but how he taught me to live without fear." Applause, tears, reverent silence. Ethan spoke for 15 minutes. No notes, no prepared speech. He spoke from the heart, about what it means to be seen as weak, about the pain of feeling invisible, and about the day under the water when he realized the real limit wasn't in his legs, but in what others believed about him. When he finished, the audience stood. It was the start of something bigger. That night, the video of his speech spread online. Millions watched it. Millions began to ask, what if we're seeing disability all wrong? Ethan didn't become a celebrity. He became a symbol. A 9-year-old boy, blonde, frail but brave, who refused to let fear decide for him. And at his side, a golden dog who never let him go. It was a crisp winter afternoon. The sky, clear and clean, seemed painted a deep blue. Riverside Park, the same place that had once been the stage for tragedy, now glowed with new energy. Kids playing on the paths, couples strolling hand in hand, elders chatting on benches. Life had returned. Tell me in the comments, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate this story so far? Your opinion means a lot to me. And among those lives, one shone brightest. Ethan Brooks, with his blonde hair slightly longer and a thick burgundy coat, moved through the park in his new motorized wheelchair, designed just for him. But that day, more than the technology, it was his smile that stood out. It was open, radiant, fearless. At his side, like a golden shadow, walked Max, with the elegant stride of an old, wise king. He wore his black harness with silver trim, and the National Hero Medal gleamed on his neck like a star that never fades. "Remember this place, Max?" Ethan asked, stopping near the same spot where weeks ago he nearly lost his life. Max lifted his head, sniffed the air, and wagged his tail slowly. It was as if, in his canine memory, the scars lived too, but without fear, without pain, just memory. "I didn't come to cry," Ethan continued. "I came to say thank you." He pulled a small wooden box from his backpack. He opened it carefully and took out a leather collar with a silver star-shaped charm. Engraved on it read, "Always together, Max and Ethan." With gentle movements, he placed it around the golden retriever's neck. This isn't just a decoration, it's a promise. At that moment, Sarah approached from the other end of the path, wearing a beige coat and a serene smile. Beside her was Emily, no longer tense, walking slowly, as if each step brought her closer to the mother she wanted to be. "Hey, champ," Sarah called. "Ready for your interview?" Ethan nodded. That day, an international documentary team would film a special on real stories of children overcoming challenges, and Ethan's would be the final story, the one that would stay in hearts. As they prepared, kids from the community began to approach, some with crutches, others in wheelchairs, others just curious. All wanted to see the boy with the hero dog. But Ethan didn't hide. He didn't look down. He met their eyes, greeted them, asked their names. He spoke to them as equals, because now he knew exactly what he could offer, not pity, but inspiration. The interview began under a massive oak tree, the camera framing Ethan and Max from below. The journalist, a Swedish woman named Claire Thompson, with platinum hair and very light blue eyes, asked, "Ethan, if you had to sum up what Max means to you in one sentence, what would it be?" Ethan looked at Max. The dog, lying beside him, lifted his head slowly, as if waiting for his answer. The boy took a deep breath. Then he said firmly, "He's not just my service dog, he's my four-legged angel, my soulmate. He saved me. But he also taught me there are no limits when love is real." Claire, moved, lowered the camera for a moment. No more questions were needed. When they returned home that night, Ethan sat by his bedroom window. He watched the stars, one by one, as if he knew them by name. Max slept at his feet deeply. The quiet was perfect. "Tomorrow will be a good day, you know," he whispered. "I don't know what's coming, but I'm not afraid, because you're with me." And so, amid the wind's murmur and the steady beat of love, Ethan and Max's story didn't end. It just turned to a new chapter, because some bonds don't break. Not with time, not with fate, not with death. Some friendships are born to last, forever. 2 years passed. Ethan and Max's story, far from fading, became a seed that bloomed in thousands of corners around the world. That 9-year-old boy who once fell into the river with a broken soul was now 11, and his heart fuller than ever. Ethan continued his studies at home for the first few months, but gradually returned to an inclusive school, where he became a natural leader for other students. He wasn't famous, he didn't want to be. He just wanted to show that a full life doesn't depend on the body, but on the will. His body improved. Physical therapy bore fruit that even the doctors hadn't dared promise at the start. Ethan didn't walk again, but he gained strength, balance, and independence that changed his relationship with the world. He could now transfer himself from his chair to other supports, swim with an adapted vest, and play Paralympic sports with confidence. Most importantly, he learned to feel whole. Max, meanwhile, aged with dignity. His golden fur began to turn silver at the muzzle, and his movements, once swift as the wind, grew slower but still purposeful. Every morning, he rose at Ethan's side with the same look as always. "Wherever you go, I go." Ethan, with Sarah and Noah, founded a small non-profit called Brave Souls, dedicated to providing animal-assisted therapy and emotional support for kids with physical disabilities. Emily, once distant and controlling, now played an active role in the project as a family coordinator. She had found in this new mission what she never thought she needed: forgiveness. One spring afternoon, Ethan was invited to the state capitol to receive a special honor. Not for the accident, not for fame, but for the social impact of his story, for inspiring local laws that improved access to inclusive education and the use of service dogs in public schools. At the ceremony, now taller, with shoulders squared and Max lying at his feet, Ethan took the stage. He looked at the audience, took a deep breath, and spoke off the cuff. "Life put up a lot of barriers for me. Some were physical, others mental. But if I'm here today, it's because someone believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. Max saved me once from the water, but he saved me many times from silence, from loneliness, from fear. And if I've learned anything, it's this: there's no disability greater than living without love, without purpose. So don't call me brave for surviving. Call brave anyone who chooses to love, even when it hurts." The auditorium stood. The applause was long, heartfelt, but Ethan didn't need it. He only wanted one thing: for Max to see him, and he did. From the floor he lifted his head, and though his eyes didn't shine as they once did, they still held that spark. That said, "I'm with you to the end." A year later, Max crossed the Rainbow Bridge. Ethan was with him. He held him in his arms, whispering every word of gratitude he'd never said aloud. He cried, yes, but not out of despair. He cried for love, because he knew friendships like that don't die. They just change form. Today, Ethan continues with his foundation. He trains service dogs with volunteers. He visits schools, gives talks, writes. He's 16 now, and every time he introduces himself, he starts the same way. "I'm Ethan Brooks, and everything I know about courage, I learned from a dog." Because some bonds don't end with the last heartbeat. Some stories don't know forgetting. And some souls, even separated by time, keep walking together. Forever. Thank you so much for sticking with this story until the end. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a ton and motivates us to keep bringing new stories every week. And since you're here, take a moment to check out another one of our stories that's popping up on your screen. Big hug and see you next time. Stay well.